here for the Driving the Business of Science podcast. My name is Keith Parent. I am the CEO of Court Square Group. We are a managed service firm specializing in managing infrastructure for life science companies, managing applications all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. And we also have a system content repository for clinical and regulatory content called RegDocs 365. This podcast is meant to find the people that I talk to on a regular basis in the industry that are doing things that we aren't doing. And I think it's great that people hear what's going on. Today, we have a very special guest with us, and we're going to be talking about Latin America and what about the Latin American market, particularly from a CRO and a sponsor perspective. We have Sara Tylosky, who is the CEO of Farmacon Global. I met Sara about a year or so ago. We got to know what each one were doing, and I introduced her to a few of my companies that I work with. She's talked to some that she's worked with, and I think there's some great things happening down in South America. And I thought that Sara would be an awesome person to talk about what's happening in her world. So, Sara, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and talk a little bit about Farmacon Global.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me on your super podcast. It's really like a fun concept. So yeah, I'm Sara Tylosky, CEO of Farmacon Global. We've been around about 15 years. And we're a little bit different than a CRO. We're more of a strategic partner. We actually had changed our names a couple times because we felt it was more appropriate. And what does that mean? We have a network of really amazing physicians, and that's our differentiator, that can engage with sites. And so we step from where you just talked about, from preclinical, we go into the clinic all the way to market access. Our big focus is Latin America. We do have a presence in the United States as well, but our big focus is in Latin America, and our major focus is in rare diseases, of course, oncology, which these days there's so many of them, they're rare, immunology, and of course, sometimes vaccines because of the location of Latin America. So what we do is we work primarily with smaller companies, biotechs to medium size. And for those guys, we just help them get it started. And then for bigger pharmas, we come and help rescue a situation. Oftentimes it's an enrollment or a challenge, whatever it could be, regulatory, whatever. So that's why we're a strategic partner. We try and be a partner rather than just a CRO.
That's fantastic. And when I got to meet you in person, I think it was over breakfast out in Boston or Cambridge or one of the ADF events or things like that. We talked a lot about what you guys were doing, and it really struck me as the amount of work that you were doing in Latin America. And I guess to start us off, what about Latin America, or what makes Latin America such a compelling and often overlooked region? I don't know if everybody thinks about going to Latin America for conducting phase 1 clinical trials. And other ones as we can, but love to hear about phase 1.
Yeah. So just to step back one step, Latin America has 660 million people. I think sometimes people don't realize it's a fairly large region with over 26 countries. And I mean, obviously that changes too. But what's interesting about it is you have such a diversity. If you think about the United States is the most diverse country in the world. Brazil is number 2. It's the 6th largest health market in the world. And it's also the second, most diverse. So you have a lot of diversity that's so important to clinical trials. I don't care about DEI, what the FDA says. The reality is you need diversity. So our sweet spot has really been when companies want to come in and add on more patients because of clinical trials. What we've seen, however, is a shift because of the time differences, because of the cost savings, and because of the diversity. And there's a lot of patients and healthy volunteers as well in Latin America. It's become a potential region where you can conduct more phase 1 trials. There's a lot of great sites down there.
I think people have a lot of misconceptions about Latin America, particularly around, you think about rural populations, you think about, and I guess I'm going to say this out of ignorance more than anything, is that, we think about people in the jungles or coming out of areas down in South America. And it's, they have some major cities down there, some major things happening down there. The medical community, I've met a number of companies that have come out of Mexico, out of Brazil. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you would work with a lot of those companies. Tell us a little bit about some of the companies that you've worked with down there. Is it mostly CROs?
No, it's not. It's mostly biotechs, I would say. That's our
Okay.
big, in fact, we brought in a company just recently got their final approval for a product that we helped, bring in the last 20% of the patients, such a critical piece. And then another company just recently also got their approval. Both of those happen to be liver conditions that are rare. So, it's the patients are there. People just don't know about it. And what's happened is Latin America is really on track to become a key player in phase one, even though it only represents 0.7% of global phase one studies. There's probably over 30 super qualified, super good data, ICH, GCP guidelines following sites in the region that are ready to go. So I think there is a misperception. People think it's, tequila and sombreros, and it's pretty sophisticated actually.
So let's jump on that for a second. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions sponsors have or biotech companies have about conducting early phase trials down in
Yeah.
Latin America?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about slow recruitment and logistical issues. Um, I think there's also a misconception about IND filing. You have to file with the FDA before you can get into a phase one, and there's about 6 countries that that's not the case. You do not have to file an IND with the FDA in order to get into a phase one. And there's as I mentioned before, these Latin American sites often deliver faster enrollments and meet the timelines very effectively. The other misperception is the long regulatory timelines. I mean, nothing's going to beat Australia. Let's just put that on the table. But the processes, even though they do vary slightly by country, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Panama, and even Chile are really very, very aligned now between 30 to 90 days getting approved. And again, if you have faster enrollment, the total package, you're going to make it up. Then let's say, I mean, I love Australia. I lived there as a kid. But there's 26 million people, and there are people really spread out. It's hard to get people there. We're seeing somewhat saturation in that market. And so Latin America is a really nice alternative. Same time zone, ICH, great data, with your reg docs type of companies that are out there. It's great data. So
You just
that's,
mentioned a couple of things. What are
yeah.
some of the things that give these companies an edge in early clinical development?
Say again. I couldn't quite hear you
How do
say
you
it.
actually, so you talked a little bit about some of the things that help the patient populations in Latin America give companies an edge, but with going after those patients. What are some
Yeah,
of the things? You just talked about time zones. We're on the same time
yeah.
for the East Coast
Yeah,
or
yeah, I'd
Central,
say no,
whatever.
that's a great. So first of all, cost. I mean, if you look at the cost, it's about 30 to 60% less than US, Europe, or even Australia, even with their great tax incentives. It's actually kind of amazing. We talked about fast recruitment, and you mentioned this. There's some huge cities. I think Sao Paulo is running about 25 million people, as is Mexico City. And so there's some great, easy places to get fast enrollment. And also many patients and volunteers are treatment naive, like for phase 1B, for people with cancer type of thing. I mentioned the fact that there's a lot of good regulatory improvements happening. The alignment for US time zone has surprised me as we've been talking to biotechs. They really get frustrated having to wake up at 1 a.m. and go communicate, across the globe. So to be aligned like Brazil and East Coast are like the same time zone, it's just helpful to have that. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, very experienced sites. I know of about 30 sites across the region that are ready to go. Have done a lot of first in human trials.
Now, how do you feel about the clinical sites themselves? Do you feel that the level of uh, clinical support is there for doing the trials?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, this is one of our value adds that we do as a strategic partner. We have something where it's called site engagement, where we actually have one of our medical leads in touch with the PI of the project. And that allows for any real communication. Some people say that Latinos, and this is a compliment, tend to say yes to everything. But at the same time, we need to dig down and find out what are the challenges, if any. And so that value add has been very helpful to get sites to be very forthright about any challenges they may have. But infrastructure wise, they're super. They have, multiple beds, they have access to emergency care if needed, that kind of thing.
Tell me something a little bit about your focus on Latin America. What drove you into looking at Latin America as kind of the area that you wanted to focus the company on?
Oh, I love that story. So to be honest with you, I was in marketing and pharma for my previous life. I think you were at Pfizer. I was with Glaxo, so that those are big companies. And I got a little burned out on that trail. My parents actually live in Mexico. Well, my father has passed away now, but they were living in Mexico. My mother still is, and they had some medical issues. So I decided to just jump off and start over basically. And I also grew up in Spain. I spent 4 of my formative years in Madrid, and I lived in Australia and in South Africa. So I have a very much an international bent, and I just found the culture quite fascinating. I'm still trying to learn Portuguese. Hablo español, pero eu não falo português. It's a very difficult language. And so I think that was a fascination that I had. And being that I was in the medical field in a different way, and I saw this need for people, especially in rare and oncology, it was just kind of fell into place that I helped rescue some trials on a one, like as a consultant, and then I got to know more doctors, and then we grew from there.
Fantastic. Tell me a little bit about the name, Farmacon Global. Doesn't kind of sing to me as um pharmaceutical. I mean, pharma does, but it's spelled differently. So tell me
Yeah,
how
yeah,
that
that's a great
interaction kind of
question.
gets there.
Well, so in every language but English, you spell farmer with F-A-R-M-A. So that's where that came out of. Yeah, it is
Interesting.
it's and also we've done some plant-based studies. And so pharma, kind of playing on the farm word. So it's a play on words. The global part is coming. We really want to get into we are working with a partner in India, and we have a partner in Africa. So, these emerging markets that are super underrepresented, our goal is to get more into those countries as well to really have better representation in clinical trials.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit more about when you say we get into more with those, tell me a little bit more about how you go out there and you look for the sites or you deal with is it a particular trial that you get involved, a particular therapeutic area, or do you just, are you driven by the customer need, or is it, how are you going after the different countries and the different sites within the
Yeah,
country?
it's a great question. Well, first of all, our team is very experienced, so they've already either been a PI. We have one doctor who's been in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We have another doctor who had his own site. We have very experienced people on our team that didn't want to do it anymore in whatever their capacity, so they've become our consultants. And that's where it started. I mean, it started with that whole site network out of that. And then it's evolved. It really does depend a lot on the need of the client. But we have found that the biotechs, they need a lot of hand-holding, and so we like to work with smaller companies because we're very dedicated that way. And it's tended to be more rare conditions, of which, sadly, in Latin America, as in a lot of emerging is always a misnomer, but in emerging markets, there's a lot of endogamy, meaning cousins marrying cousins, and so you get genetic rare conditions, and the data about those patients is emerging. A lot of the patient advocacy groups we're now very much tied to through our experience, and they help us lead to, the patient, and then we go with the biotech to find the site. So we're like a matchmaker. We're like Shelley, but on the ground in Latin America.
That Shelley, of course, is Shelley Amster, who we both know and love it for all the things that she does. And I've actually had her on the podcast, and she was fantastic, talking
She's a
about some women's health issues and things like that. So that was pretty cool that she was able to join us as well. Looking ahead, how do you see Latin America's role evolving in the global clinical trial landscape,
Yeah,
particularly from what you've been on after?
yeah. So as I said, we've made a big push to expand more of this phase 1 kind of research opportunities. And why is that? There's so much innovation, Keith. You know that. There's so many biotechs out there. I think there's like 4,000 of them in the United States alone. Of course, they're all looking for funding. That's always the first step. But once they get past the preclinical, they're like, oh, where do we do now? And Australia is a great answer for many, many clients. I mean, it's like I said, it's fantastic. However, there's a missed opportunity in our own backyard, right here, right south of the border. And there's a lot of misperception due to our wonderful media and how they misconstrue a lot. Like, oh my God, you get shot. Well, you probably get shot downtown Boston too. It's like the misperceptions are pretty high. And so one of our goals is to educate that there's quality doctors, quality data, good data, There's a lot of great technology that's coming out of Brazil in particular, but even Argentina is settled down with its new president. So why wouldn't you go to a place that has the diversity that a lot of companies need? Maybe not in the first iteration, maybe not in the healthy volunteers, but certainly once they have that condition, there's a lot of people in need in Latin America. Why not go there? That's what I always say. Why not?
Why do you think that there's such maybe a block or a wall up for
Yeah.
some of these big companies about going to Latin America? What's the issue in your mind?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the big companies are there. So that's like the Takedas and the Vertex and the Roche, they're already there. I think this is a theory I have because there's 2 points. One, the Latin American community of doctors isn't always sharing what they should share as a group. You know, it's they're not as team oriented as they should be. And if the region would come together, that's one of our jobs, more they could share more about their successes because they're out there. So I think that's one misperception. The other big misperception, we've seen this because we've been involved in these later clinical trials, is that enrollment is so good and so fast that everybody goes, oh my God, we got to audit the site. You know, it's a very common thing when you take the highest enrolling site in any region, you're going to audit them. And in our experience, they've all come out beautiful. Like the audits have been fine, the data is fine. But I think because of that fast enrollment, perhaps there's a perception, well, they're faking the data or something. I'm not even sure, but it's not true. The culture in Latin America is that doctors still have a lot of respect. You know, unfortunately, in the United States, the patient is king, which is not a bad thing. But let's say the doctor has the one with experience, and patients really respect what doctors have to say. So once those patients are coming into a trial, they really are, the retention is very good. But I think it's just a misperception about what's going on in the space.
It was interesting. I was just on a conversation talking about key opinion leaders and healthcare providers that are out there and learning about new products and things like that. Do you see the Latin American market and the KOLs down in Latin America? Do they come to the United States
Oh,
to get their
yes.
knowledge? How are they how do they view the United States?
Absolutely. I mean, they go to all the big conference, the KOLs all go to the United States and Europe on whatever disease du jour, the cancer conferences, the liver conferences, absolutely. And in the bigger countries like in Mexico and Argentina and Brazil and in Colombia, those 4 big countries, those KOLs are globally respected. I mean, we had this one trial we were at, we had a global KOL that was on our trial, and he was like leading these national, you know, chats with the other sites across the globe. It's just there's a perception out there that they're not there, but in fact, they're highly educated. Many of them are educated in Europe, Spain, Portugal, United States. You know, and you know this. There's a lot of U.S. doctors that go to Guadalajara, for example, for medical school because it's cheaper. So it's a different system, but the quality is certainly there, and the commitment is very high. And I think that's also part of it. You know, that once the doctor says, yes, I'm in, like a site, they're really committed to the program, and that's super important.
That's fantastic. I just still find it fascinating that um, Latin America is it's just to ourselves, and yet it seems like it's so overlooked from our perspective, and to be able to have a company like yours that really can help to grease the skids for these companies to get down there and to do work down there and to help companies kind of navigate what's going on down there, I think is fantastic. So I
Yeah,
applaud you for being able to do that and see, have the foresight to be able to see that as a way of doing business. And when we talk about the business of science, people don't realize how there's these niche areas that are so important. And I think that, whether it is a diversity issue, whether it is something like that, I think it's important that companies like Farmacon Global are out there that can actually help to just educate these small to mid-sized companies that there's a whole market that they're missing. And
yeah.
so your ability to be able to get out there and do that is fantastic. So again, I think to you, I think that's great. One last question from my end. Down in South America, Latin America, do you find any kind of disease states that are more unique to them down there versus other areas around you, whether it's in the United
Well,
States or
yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I mean, obviously Mexico is #1 in diabetes in the world per capita. I mean, that's kind of obvious. That's the whole US influence and therefore obesity. So that's not so unique, but that's a reality. And the other ones I would say, as far as uniqueness, there's just a lot of rare conditions in the space that a lot of people are not aware of. A lot of oncology, a ton. I mean, it's sad, that's very sad, but that's also part of it. And immunology. And then in terms of bigger trials, like Chagas disease, or we did a COVID vaccine trial with 9,000 patients. So any of these viruses, dengue, that's more common in those neck of the woods are also important. So I would say those are the big buckets. The other comment I want to say is that we are just also starting to work with some of these CROs out of Australia who get those phase ones, but they don't have enough patients to do the phase twos. And so they're turning us to say, okay, you've got the patients, you've got the space, you do have the diversity. We need to work together. And that's a collaborative that we're just starting right now because we're seeing that as a need as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I really enjoy talking to you, Sarah. How about any last words for the crowd out there? Anything about you, anything about Farmacon Global, or about the Latin American market you want to share, and you make sure that people understand about what's going on down there.
Well, I appreciate your finality there. If biotechs out there that are needing phase one, want to save money, have fast recruitment, and be aligned with the US as far as a time zone for first in human or phase 1B, well, just let us know, please. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we are actually having a webinar about sustainable data strategy. And so maybe I can give that to you and we can put that in the final.
Give it a plug right now. When's
Yeah.
it happening?
So
And
it's September, yeah, great. It's September 18th, 2025, 12 noon. I believe that's a Thursday. I should know that on my calendar, but let me just see. I think, yeah, that is a Thursday. And we will really be discussing, regulatory reforms, infrastructure, how we can have sustainable data strategy within the globe, because we know that's so important with all these AI tools and all these tools that are going out there. How do we keep the patient safe,
excellent. And I'll just let everybody know that I see Sarah in the Boston area quite often for somebody who's very well traveled. Again, I saw her, I think you're probably going to end up going to the ADDF conference again that we have in the
Yes.
Boston area in December. So hopefully I'll be able to see you there, but I'm sure we'll see you elsewhere before that happens. And I look forward to your webinar, actually. It'll be fantastic to be a part of it.
Excellent. Yeah, we're going to be at ADDF and talking on a panelist about the value of Latin America. So I'm excited.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Cool.
And I want to thank all of our listeners or watchers, because we post this in a number of different places. And Sarah, you'll get a copy of this to be able to link out to it for your website and everything else. So thanks everybody for listening to the Driving the Business of Science podcast. Our goal again is just to open everybody's minds to the different areas within the life science world that people may not think about. And every day it fascinates me with the people that I work with and come across, and I just want to share that knowledge and that fascination with everyone else. So thank you all for joining. Sarah, again, it's been a pleasure, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much, Keith. You're awesome. I appreciate your time too.